15? How about 15 to 20, 25? Are most of you in bigger firms or smaller? Bigger. Okay, so over 30? Okay. So in your firms, just in this sense, are there second generation leaders, third generation? Are the founders still around? Founders are still around.
They're retiring. Yeah.
They're retiring.
In a couple of the founders are still around, and the other is a second generation.
And, you know, and I often start by thinking about this because, you know, ultimately for most founders, that's what planning should really be about, you know, how they're going to, excuse me, how they're going to create, you know, more value in their firm beyond, you know, their own personhood, and how they're going to pass it on to other people. But in the general sense, no, maybe you should just do it for me.
Okay.
As I'm sure many of you know, all of our firms operate in an unpredictable environment. So I have this picture of a hurricane up here because, the next one, because, you know, hurricanes will happen whenever there's a certain conditions in the ocean, warm enough air, etc. Hurricane would form, but you never know exactly when it's going to happen until you study it over time. So one of the lessons about planning in an unpredictable environment is looking at trends over time. So go to the next slide. So one of those trends is financial. Taking a look at how the whole economy has moved over time, and of course we see this intense downward spiral in 2020, and then the bounce back in 22, and then go to the next slide. And then we see inflationary trends going way up, and now we're back down to an almost normal inflation level as we get into 23. Now I mentioned this, and I know most of you are not on the finance side of the firm, but understanding the trends, the economic trends that influence your firm's ability to prosper becomes really critical as you plan forward. Understanding the construction business cycle is part of that. So where are we in the cycle? Where are you in this cycle in Boston now? In the Northeast? Anybody want to hazard a guess? Still in the boom market, or stable? So you're not seeing any rent concessions, anything like that going on. We are definitely seeing tightening funds, and if any of you, you know, are in a firm that does residential work, we're seeing that contract a little bit as a result of it. On the West Coast, we're almost having recessionary situation. Some of you might have branches there in Seattle, San Francisco, even LA. Things are much slower than they have been in the past. So understanding where your firm in the business cycle can really help you, you know, understand where you need to emphasize your marketing. It's also important to understand the firm financial trends, and they often track with certain financial indicators, but not always. Taking a look in this case, you know, there's been pretty steady growth over the years, with a little downturn in 19 and 2020, but getting a sense of what's being planned on the financial side and how that relates to trends in the past also becomes critical in understanding what you might be able to do in the future. So seeing whole systems is part of a notion of being able to understand all the influences that surround your firm. So right now we're dealing with a whole lot of change in our marketplace form. we have the influence of a new generation in our firms. Millennials are becoming the dominant generation in most of the firms that we work with, and their way of working and their way of looking at the world is probably pretty different than the baby boomer founders or principals that are still there, probably in the firm. The Gen X generation is a very small generation, about half the size of the boomers and millennials. So they'll probably never be more than 33% of the workforce, and yet are, so critical in that generation, so critical in our functioning now, because they're often, the emerging leaders and the ones who are going to take over from the maybe founding principals. We also have the remote work revolution. Now, it wasn't a revolution in our company, but I think if you asked any firm principals in January of 2020 whether they could possibly function remotely, every one of them would say no, right? And then 3 months later, everybody's doing it. And now we really have a dilemma on our hands, because I think that many firms have experienced that, remote work is really good. It provides a lot of flexibility, a lot of ability for people to maybe stay in the architectural workplace in a way that they wouldn't have otherwise. But a lot of firms are finding that it's kind of hard to do architecture that way, and that they really need people to come back to the firm, 3 or 4 days a week and it's really hard to learn that way. And we have an industry-wide talent shortage, and that is for real. And because of that, salaries are going up, and we have to market our firms to new recruits as much as clients these days. So it's all about becoming strategic, going from a point of being opportunistic to really understand all the moving parts around our firm, financial and other social and otherwise, that are, affecting our ability to prosper. However, no matter how much you plan, it almost always really comes down to the culture of the firm. Can you actually execute these plans? Yeah, are these plans consistent with the culture and what people are likely to do? And what we find when we ask people, for the next slide, in architectural firms, what they, to describe their culture, we always see words like this, and I'm sure you fight words like this every single day. Every architect is collaborative and engaging, However, this next group of words is as important. And you hardly ever see people talk about that when you talk about the culture of firms, but and they're not adversarial, that first slide. And these group of words need to have discipline, we need to have procedures, we need to have accountability. All those operational things are critical to executing plans and to doing well, both financially and having meaning in your work. So, back over to Bella.
Okay, so now we know some of the things we have to pay attention to before we start planning, but how do you actually start to craft that plan? How do you pull it together? And that one question that we often get is, well, what's the end product supposed to look like? And the answer is whatever you want it to look like. So it can be short. I've done single page plans for firms, or it can be long. I've done 50-page plans for firms. It really depends on how are you going to use the plan and what tool are people going to pay attention to. So I wanted to start with a little bit of terminology so that we're all on the same page, at least in this presentation, on what we're talking about. So there's lots of different plans. People call different plans different things. So when we're thinking about planning at CVG, we're thinking about a strategic plan, a business plan, marketing plan, operations plan, financial plan. So the way that all of those things interact is your strategic plan is kind of your big, meaty, these are the things that you want to do in the next 3 to 5 years. This is the vision of where you're going. Whereas the business plan is really meant to be a 1-year horizon. You should be putting a business plan together each year, and whatever goes into that plan really should be supporting the objectives that you have in your strategic plan. And then dialing that in a little more, from there you've got your marketing plan, which is really talking about what are the marketing strategies and tactics that we're going to use to support the objectives that we've laid out in our business plan, what we're working on this year, that supports our strategic plan, what we're working on in the next 3 to 5 years. Just like marketing has their plan, there should also be a financial plan. How are you making money? How much money do you think you're going to make? What are the expenses going to be? How does that all kind of pen out? And what investments are you going to be making this year? Then you've got your operations plan. We have other aspects of the firm that we need to plan for. Are there any big technology changes or purchases that are coming up? Are there any big HR initiatives? Is recruiting like the #1 priority this year, as it seems to be every year? And how do you attract those people? So you bring all of these plans together, and that really forms kind of the blueprint of this is how we're operating our firm. Strategic plan lives at the top, and then the others flow out of the strategic plan. Okay, so thinking about planning and how you want to approach it from more of a philosophical standpoint, I guess you could say, is you want to be thinking about what are all of the interrelated things of the plan, starting with what's the purpose? Like, what is your firm existing to do? Because everything should be aligned with that purpose. But within that, as you're starting to put goals together, one goal is going to have implications for the financial plan, the operations plan, the marketing plan. So it really needs to be intertwined so that everybody can come together and work together toward all of the same common goals. So 4 different aspects of your plan. And we start with purpose. And this is in the worksheet that you download at the end. You'll have lots of questions to prompt you to get at your purpose if you don't already have a clearly defined purpose. So it starts with defining your mission. Your mission is really like, who are you? What are you doing? Who are you doing it for? And how is it getting done? It's something that if you create a mission statement, you should be able to show it to a client. They should read it and be like, that is totally you. If they tell you, what? This makes absolutely no sense to me, then you know you've got some misalignment either with how you're perceived in the market, or you've got some misalignment internally about what your firm is really about. So it's really important to align those 2 things. Oh. We have more people in the waiting room. There we go. And then vision. Vision is kind of the basis of where your strategic plan is going to come out of. The vision is something that you use it internally, whereas the mission statement can be an external resource for you. Your vision statement is really yourselves making sure everyone is aligned and saying, this is where we're going. And the reason that that's important, especially with firms that have multiple principals, is one principal can be off in this direction, kind of doing what they like to do. Another principal is off in this direction, doing what they like to do. The third principal is back here, maybe not even doing anything, just kind of coasting along the way. And you get to a 5-year point and you're like looking around at the firm and it's like, we're in the exact same spot. What happened? I thought that we were going here, but everyone else is like, no, we're going here. So the vision is like your rallying cry. It is, wait a minute, I know you're really excited about this project, but does it align with where we really want to be going, or should we be putting resources elsewhere? By the end of the presentation, I'm gonna have this clicking thing down. And then your values. Values just support everything that you're doing in the firm. And if you have really strong values, we have found that they're super useful when it comes to recruiting, because you can make some judgment calls based on, does this candidate's values really align with our firm values? And the way that you craft the values is entirely up to you and how the culture of your firm works. I would say, let's try not to go beyond 5 values. Otherwise things get pretty watered down and it's like, well, we're everything to everyone. Not that that would ever be a problem. And then, so you have all of those things together, and now it's time to really think about, well, what is our value proposition? You know who you are at the end of putting together your mission, vision, values, and you know who your clients are, or who you want your clients to be, but where is the overlap there? Where is kind of your special sauce that is going to attract people to want to work with your firm? So these are value propositions that I hear from probably, I don't know, 90% of the new firms that I start working with. Everyone is collaborative. We've all won awards. We're all client focused. Sustainable is another big one right now. It's like that bus has kind of left the station. Everyone needs to be sustainable. It's not really a value proposition. And on budget and on schedule. Like, who would hire you if you didn't know how to keep your project on schedule and on budget? And I know some firms do it better than other firms, but from a prospective client's mind, it's like, yeah, I would hope that you're kind of all of these things. And all of your competitors are also saying that they're all of these things. So when you think about doing value proposition, do the classic, so what? So if you say, my firm's collaborative, so what? What does it mean? How are you collaborative? Is there any kind of nugget within the word collaborative that's actually a differentiator? So we provide exceptionally thorough construction documents. So the so what on your construction documents, minimum change orders, no surprise costs. That's a lot better than we're really good at CDs. Engaged in the local community. So what behind that is, well, we know everybody at the planning department and they like us and we get our projects through quicker than somebody who doesn't have the contacts in the planning agency. So some examples of some strong value propositions. Founded by an Air Force veteran, IDG approaches each project with military precision, listening, strategizing, and executing while faithfully meeting every deadline. It's like, it screams military, right? You read that and you get a real sense for who is this firm? Who are the leaders, probably? Next one, Rohr Schmidt architecture was founded on the belief that at its core, good design requires taking a fundamentally optimistic view of the world. We come to work each day jazzed to find that sweet spot where the interplay of quality and value is balanced and optimized, where work and play are virtually indistinguishable. That says a little more than we're collaborative. And then one more. Our clients appreciate that ThoughtCraft's design approach is both structured and spirited, yielding wildly unique outcomes. The results are specific to time and place, anchored in concept, layered with meaning, and built with precise details that are communicated through a solid, thorough set of terms. It's a little bit of a tongue twister, but this is a lot more eloquent than we'll work with you to get the job done. So just some examples to think about and compare and contrast to your own firm's value statements. So next step is financial planning.
All right, maybe I can do this.
It is
The right one.
that one, yes.
All right, so I want to talk a little bit about, just starting a little bit with basics about finance and, you know, why we do financial management and how financial management is different from accounting. Because financial management is really about providing insight to make smart business decisions, and you need to kind of look backwards and see what has happened and then look forward to see what could happen. Now, this is kind of different than, oops, I'm doing the same thing you did, right? This is kind of different than accounting, which is really about focusing on tax considerations, trying to really understand things mostly on a cash basis. You know, do we have enough money to make payroll this quarter? Do we, you know, how are we doing in terms of profitability? All that kind of thing is looked at through accounting, but accounting really operates on a cash basis, which is like your checkbook, money in, money out, what's left over. Whereas financial management really depends on looking at things on an accrual basis, which means, what did you invoice? How much did you earn in this period? Whether they paid you or not, doesn't really matter. What really matters is how much you earned, how much you had to spend or you're obligated to spend, and what you have left over. So if you want to know if the company is being profitable, you have to look at reports on an accrual basis, because cash basis will only tell you, you know, how much money you have right now, because somebody paid you yesterday for work they did, you know, 3 months ago, right? So, so in order to really understand things, and if you have an opportunity to look at profit and loss reports in both ways, you can see the difference between what you would find out on a cash basis and what you would find out on an accrual basis, and the same thing. So if you only looked at this on a cash basis, you're like, woohoo, look at all the cash we have, let's spend it. And if you look at it on an accrual basis, you realize, well, actually, you know, that money is actually due someplace else, and we only have really 3,000 in profit. So it's really important as you plan to think about that. So looking at the influences of profitability, we look at a couple of really important key financial indicators. Utilization rate over there in the orange is one of them, and that is the relationship between hours worked on projects and total hours. So it's really talking about how many billable hours are being produced by the entire firm. And that includes non-billable employees as well. So because as we know, non-billable employees often help billable employees be more billable. So we have to account for that in the utilization rate, and target is about 65% for the entire staff. And then we have billable, we have how many of those hours that were actually produced, actually worked on projects, do you actually get paid for? And we know that in most architectural firms, we're in almost every architectural firm, hours are discounted. You know, we see best practice at about 90%. So if you could get paid for 90% of the hours that's produced, and it's the value of the hours produced at the billing rate. So it doesn't matter whether you're charging hourly or charging on a fixed fee, which I hope most of you are doing. You're comparing the value of the hours worked on a project to what you, or in a year or in a period of time, to what you actually receive. And that's known as the billable ratio, which is over here. So that influences how much income you actually get. So you work a whole bunch of hours, you invoice the client for most of them, maybe not. And honestly, we see firms all the time that have like a 70% billable ratio, or realizable rate is another term for that you might have seen. And that's like building 100 widgets and throwing 30 of them in the garbage. Yeah. I mean, it's really hard for a firm to be profitable if you can't get that billable ratio up. And then the other influence, of course, is the operating expenses. How much does it cost to actually run the firm? So we chart those often in this kind of way to take a look at how the firm is doing over a period of time. Best practice being 90% for billable ratio and 65 for utilization rate. And this firm, which has high utilization rate, meaning they're producing tons of hours, but have a really low billable ratio, meaning they're not getting paid for a whole lot of them. So, I don't know if any of you work in firms like that, but people, sometimes over deliver, have scope creep, or just churning out hours and hours and hours on projects, and maybe have no sense of what the budget of the project would be, which is kind of the first step to getting this kind of thing corrected. We also look at, and as you're planning forward, it becomes really important to think about a revenue forecast. So we can think about a forecast in two different ways. Like, what is it possible for the firm, the staff as it's constituted now, what is it possible to produce? What's its capacity? And how does that compare to the revenue forecast that you have from doing proposals? So backlog is, your contracts in hand and how much hasn't yet been invoiced, plus prospects, which is the value of proposals, plus suspects, which are leads identified, but you maybe haven't done a proposal on them yet. And if you add that all up, you take 90% of the backlog, 50% of the prospects, because generally, I don't know how the hit rate is in your firms, but generally 50% is typical. And then of the suspects, we only take 10% because they're way out there, and backlog 90% because all jobs don't come through. So it's a way of understanding a revenue forecast if you're building, say, a 5-year performer, or even looking at next year. So when we think about the revenue side of a forecast, can do it that way I just showed, looking at all the projects that may be coming in the pipeline. And as I mentioned, you can also look at the capacity of the firm to produce. So if you have these as utilization rates times their salary, you can figure out how many billable hours in theory they can produce, what their billing rate is, and what the total billings of the firm could be, which is this number here. Then I reduce it by 10% because, they won't get every dollar that they actually produce. And then you get a sense of what this could be, right? So this firm, the capacity of this entire firm, if they work really well and get 90%, could get up to 860,000 in revenue this year. Compare that to how much you have booked or what's in the pipeline, and you can get a sense of what the revenue projection for a year should be. And then you have to look at the other side, the operations expense. And we look at a typical budget for, say, a firm that's earning between 500,000 and $1 million. And for those of you who are in bigger firms, the revenue might be more like 9 million or 10 million. And so as you go up in revenue, you'll find the percentage of payroll reduces. And that seems logical. For a firm that's under 10, say a firm is only earning 500,000 a year, they'd be under 5 for that, but almost like in a firm like that, it's more like 70% of their revenue goes to a salary. And there's hardly anything left over for operations or profit. The bigger the firm gets, the more opportunity you have for money to be left over for profit or operations, because the percentage of it that goes to salary will be reduced. And I think in most firms that are over, 3 or 4 million, we'll see this percentage being more like 45%. And so there's more left over for benefits and other kinds of things. So trying to understand how to develop a pro forma, and this is more of a study of a strategic plan where you would be looking out 5 years. It's a little easier to kind of figure out what the revenue or expenses might be for annually, because you have the past year to look at, and things often don't change that much in 1 year. You can build a profit plan to understand what your firm's capacity is. But when you start looking out further, like 5 years or even 10 years, in a strategic plan, it gets very difficult to predict, what's going to happen. I mean, there could be a pandemic or a recession or something. So you have to kind of do it a bit formulaically, and also as you go out further, maybe being a little less optimistic. But the way that you can understand how to get this total operating expense number is using formulas as I've shown up there, understanding what the direct salary expense is. So that's the portion of salary expense that's worked on projects. Divide that into the operating expense, and you get the break-even rate. You multiply that break-even rate times a future direct labor expense, and you can get what the total operating expense might be. Oops. So as you build a 5-year pro forma, you can project out the revenue. Usually you use a percentage, like increase it by 3% a year, or some, unless you really know, oh, next year we've got all these giant projects, is it be 10%? But as you go further out, it's typical that it might be 3%, 2% a year, and over a period of 5 years, it might be typical to be a 5 or 7% growth in our industry. Then with the formulas, which you'll see as you get the worksheets, you can figure out what direct labor is likely to be and what the operating budget and profit will be as you move out. And I just want to mention this last row here, that NOR per FTE, these acronyms that nobody knows. NOR stands for net operating revenue, FTE for full-time equivalency. So we're talking about revenue per person, essentially, for full-time person. And these numbers here are pretty low for the average. I think in most of your firms, you'll see it being more like 130 to 150 per person. And the larger the firm is, the more that will likely be. And you can see how, when you think about salaries, your own salary, whatever, that we have to be able to bring in, probably 130 to 150 per person in order to really be profitable. So, and that is the industry average, 130 to 150. And so, as you plan forward, that's a really good tool to use, because that doesn't change that much as the firm grows or year by year, unless for some reason you begin to get much higher fees or people begin to get much more efficient in their work, and that honestly usually doesn't happen. So that revenue per person kind of stays similar, and you can, if the firm's going to grow a number of people, you can use that to help generate what the revenue should be. Or you can use expense per person in the same way. You can look at what the expense was for this year, figure out what the expense per person is. Now, expense per person doesn't stay the same. it goes up maybe at least 3% a year, just average inflation. So you can build a pro forma in that way as well. Quickly, action plan for finance. The first thing is timesheet discipline. Honestly, I can't tell you how many firms we deal with where it's really hard to get people to keep their time. And you have no financial intelligence, you have no data if you don't start with how people are spending their time. And so that becomes really important. And then quarterly, you want to track the progress of your financial goals against what's actually happened. Same thing with annual profit planning and budgeting, and then long-term, this 5-year pro forma that we've talked about. And I think that's it. Oh, no, now I'll go on to operations. Just quickly, are there any questions? I know it's a lot, and we will give you a worksheet, and if you like, after we're done, you come up and get a card and email us and get these slides. We'd be happy to send them to you. And because I know there's a lot of stuff in there that just went by, but any quick questions?
Yeah, I have a question about overhead. Do you have like a benchmark for principals to work on business development and marketing, like the overhead ideal ratio, and how we can convince them to support us and forget that I have to be 90% minimum?
Yeah.
So is there any benchmark you can tell us over time that supports that?
Well, we think that principals average, if you have a number of principals, it might be average over all of them, should be spending about 20% of their time doing business development.
Each.
And well, average.
Average, okay, not all of them will. But
Not all of them will, but all of them should spend at least 10% of their time, 4 hours a week or so. And we really believe that principals should be reducing their project time, that their utilization rate should be more than 50%, because the other people should be doing the everyday project management. And the principals should only do what, only principals can do. And they often are very resistant to delegating, or they don't have anybody to delegate to. So you have to, build the staff so there are people to delegate to, and, encourage the principals through that, because it's really important. So should we go into operations, which relates to your question? Well, quite a bit. So one of the things that we talk about in operations is making sure that how your firm is staffed is consistent with the kind of business model that you're in. And these are the 3 common, pretty much only business models for architecture firms, or professional firms in general. So we have efficiency-based firms that are like, if any of you are familiar with a firm like Mulvaney G2 out of the Pacific Northwest, they do Costco's all over the world and stuff like that, tilt up big box stores. They have a huge junior staff because, there just isn't that much work to do, design work to do in those kinds of things. And the junior staff, at a firm like Mulvaney, they're very well trained. They're really well taken care of, and they learn a lot there. But they make tons of money because they're doing these repeatable projects and they're experts at it. On the other end of the scale are the experts. They're really narrow experts in very complex projects, people who have a very deep knowledge in a narrow area. So it might be, a sustainability expert. It might be, or we should say building science expert is probably more appropriate now. Or it might be a commercial kitchen designer. It could be, we can think of many different expertises in our firm, but these folks have a lot of people at the top. They can be top heavy because it's the experts who know the stuff who have to do a lot of the work. And they make their money by charging high fees. I know something nobody else knows, so you have to pay me a lot. Sadly, in a way, most architecture firms are in this middle category, experience-based, which means they have experience in solving complex problems. So if you're really good at designing a city hall, you probably could design a high school. You know, that knowledge of solving complex problems is applicable. And the main way that experience-based firms prosper is by accruing knowledge and applying it to the next project. So knowledge management becomes really critical in these kinds of firms. The other thing about it is that is that you have to have a balanced staffing triangle. Because if principals are doing what project managers could do, you know, it's just money going out the window, right? If project managers can do what interns or drafters or juniors could do, again, money going out the window. So making money in an experience-based firm is about good management and having the right person do the right thing. And that's why it's so hard. Honestly, you know, that it becomes really critical that you have the right people in the right seats in these kind of firms.
Rena, I think we might have a question in the chat.
Okay. Let's see what it is.
No, sorry.
Okay, all right,
False alarm.
no worries. So this same kind of typology really kind of applies to projects too. And we architects have this terrible habit of like reinventing the wheel for everything, or every project is going to be, you know, an opportunity for great creative expression. And we know that that really isn't very true in our industry, and that, you know, many projects are relative, you know, I think it's probably because we get about 65% of projects come through referrals in those firms, you know, with clients, you know, before. So they're projects we've done before, you know, from the same kind of clients, they know things. And so, you know, treating more routine projects like they deserve is with standard repeatable processes is important. But there are craft projects, which are more like ones where you really do have to apply past knowledge to a new situation. And then occasionally there are the special projects that give people an opportunity for creative expression. But one of the most, what we see so often in most firms, like we were talking about before, is principals who won't let go of project management, everyday project management. And it's based on research, not just our opinion. It's a real limit to growth. You know, if principals cannot get out there and do business development and mentor other people to do what they've been doing, it's really hard for the firm to grow. You know, so I want you all to encourage your firm leaders to develop other people who can do what they do, or maybe even do it better. And the importance of administrative support, and that includes marketing and business development support. But so many principals, you know, we work with firm leaders of all sizes who just want to do the bookkeeping for some reason. You know, it's like they're not experts at it. They barely know how to do QuickBooks, and they insist. And so we try to encourage them, if nothing else, to outsource the bookkeeping. But we also encourage, you know, to, as a firm grows, to bring on more administrative support, marketers, project administrators who can do a lot of work for the project managers. That's a little more routine or administrative. These things enable the architects to be more effective in their work. And the other thing that we work with our firms with is to think about organizational design, which, you know, when I first went, I had a practice for about 20 years in Seattle. I went back to business school because I wanted to learn how to run my practice better. And, because it wasn't doing that great. But one of the things I learned is that there's this discipline of organizational design, like, wow. This is just made for architects and to understand, you know, how work flows through it, who's doing what, and to think about, you know, the design of the firm in terms of roles and responsibilities and authority, and it can take a lot of forms. That last one was one partner, this one is two. If you have many partners, often this is kind of circular, you know, where the partners are kind of a leadership team and maybe things spiral out from each of them, studios or other things that they lead. So there can be this can take a lot of forms, but it's a bit of a fun exercise to do with your firm. And part of that is really understanding project roles and responsibilities. And that's often kind of unspoken, I guess, kind of tacit thing. And it really needs to be explicit, you know, and it really helps people to understand where they are and what they're supposed to do at each phase and who they're responsible to. So we encourage our firms to really dive deep into understanding each person's roles and what they're meant to do and who they can learn from and who they can teach as part of operational exploration. And I do a lot of work with firms that are involved in ownership transition. And when we talk about future planning, I think we can't ignore, you know, exit strategies for partners. And, you know, it depends on how much time you have, 5 to 10 years. You have a lot of options of what you might be able to do. If you go a little bit further without doing anything, your options begin to close down. If you have no successor, you know, firms close their doors all the time or get acquired. That's the same person. Oh, enter the waiting room. Admit them. I don't mean to be such a moron with this, but I use a Mac all the time. Okay. All right. So this slide is just summarizing the things that are important in operations. And I think knowledge management, roles and responsibilities, a culture of continuous improvement becomes really important in all of this. Okay.
Okay. So,
Wait,
yeah.
any questions? I'm sorry. This one, you know, since we're a small group, okay, great, go for it.
Okay. So thinking back to our 4 boxes, we've gone through purpose, we've gone through financial, we've gone through operations. So now we're in the 4th bucket of marketing and business development. So marketing activities, which I know there's a lot of marketers in the room, so you're probably very familiar with marketing activities, but a little bit of a laundry list of what constitutes a marketing activity. Versus what would constitute a business development activity. Really, marketing is so that when somebody shows up in the room and introduces themselves, the light bulb goes off in the other person's head like, oh, I've heard of your firm. So you've probably all seen it in your LinkedIn feeds. There's like this wonderful little cartoon that compares marketing and business development in the dating world. It's like, and I think they add in branding as well. Branding is what makes you attractive. Marketing is what makes somebody want to go out and on a date with you in the first place. And business development is getting a second date once you're there. So it's a nice little analogy to kind of think through, where are you in this process? So we've boiled this down to 6 steps to creating your marketing plan. Step number 1 is, what do you want to accomplish? So these are your goals. And ideally, your marketing goals are goals that are going to support goals in your business plan, which support the goals in your strategic plan. So they should be pretty specific. Someone needs to look at the goal and really understand, like, okay, what is it we're trying to do? So here's some examples of a goal that hopefully is pretty understandable, like what's the end goal here? Win a public project in 2023 with a fee of $100,000 or more. It's pretty concrete, you know what you're chasing. So then once you have your goals together, we need to really think about, okay, we have our goal. We want to win a public project worth $100,000 or more this year. Who is that person that we're trying to get interested in our services? Who's the target client? And start asking yourself questions about, who is this person? Where are they located? What are they kind of consuming in order to get information? What are in the age range can also guide sort of the consumption patterns. Like, are they flipping through the trade magazine that's on their desk? Or are they going through Instagram? Or do they spend their whole day watching TikTok videos? Depending on who that person is, your marketing has to be in that channel of where that person is. And usually it's not quite as easy as, we know that all of our developers are on TikTok, so we're just going to focus on TikTok. You have to kind of come at it with a multi-pronged approach. You want to reach the people that are consuming the trade journals. You want to reach the people that are just paying attention to what are the headlines in the Boston Business Journal. You want to reach the people that are scrolling through Instagram at night, or hopefully not all day at their desk. That could be too. And then thinking about the target market, you need to go through, most firms don't just do one type of project. So you also don't have one target market. You have to expand it to make sure that you know who everyone is that you're trying to reach. And that within a marketing plan, your firm could be in 5 primary markets, but for some reason that year, you may be focused on growing 2 markets. So concentrate your marketing dollars on those 2 markets so that you can actually reach your goals. You don't forget about the other 3 markets, but they don't take the priority that those 2 markets where the goals are concentrated take. So once you have all of your target markets together, you need to really think about, okay, what's different about them? How are we going to reach each one of them? Messaging is going to be different. Value propositions are probably going to be different. Where you meet people are going to be different. There's so many differences, even though it also all kind of looks the same. It's like, what events do we want to attend? Well, let's attend 10 events, and which event is going to get to which market? So same, but different. And then understand their needs. So where I believe this is most important is if you can truly understand their needs, then you can start to develop content that speaks to their needs, because most people are gonna get like 80% toward their decision before you even know that they're looking at your firm. So if you can produce content, whether that's like long form case studies or shorter form blog posts or newsletters or social media, make it educational and make it speak to the things that are keeping your clients up at night, not the things that as architects, you're totally excited by. Because unfortunately, and that's what kind of makes the writing a little boring for architects, is the things you're really jazzed about usually aren't the things that are keeping your clients up at night, even though they are a lot more fun to talk about and illustrate out and draw. But you can find a balance, because you also want to produce content that's going to attract future employees, and they are jazzed about the things that you're jazzed about. So then step number 4 we know what our goals are, we know who we're going after, we know what's keeping them up at night, we know how to reach them, so now you need to just connect the dots along the whole entire spectrum so that your marketing plan is gonna produce results for your firm. And then this is sort of back to the value proposition of who are our clients, what do they want to be, what are their big goals and aspirations, who are we, and we know who we are because we've gone through all of the purpose exercises, where's the overlap so that we know the sweet spot. And knowing the sweet spot, it also helps you to craft language on your website or other lead generation tools so that the people that you don't want to work with don't waste your time by contacting you. Because getting 500 leads on the surface sounds fantastic, but if only 5 of those leads are people that you would ever want to do a project with, then imagine how many hours you're wasting just kind of getting through those conversations to figure out like, wow, there is not even a close match here. Step 5 is brainstorm tactics. This is where you kind of get to the fun stuff and you start creating what your marketing campaign is going to be. And the best firms will do this in a group and not tell their marketer to go sit in a corner and just brainstorm a bunch of tactics to make the marketing plan work. Because creativity comes from everywhere and you want to be getting a lot of different perspectives. And as one single individual or even a group of people that are all focused on one single task, it's really hard to get a true understanding of all of the different approaches that you could take to getting business. But if you can pull people in a room that have different backgrounds and that are at different stages in their career and consume information differently, then you're going to get a much broader approach to some tactics that could be a little more far-reaching. And then step 6. Step 6 is where everything falls apart. This is where you have a lovely marketing plan. You know exactly what you're trying to accomplish. You know exactly how you're going to do it. And then somebody drops 5 RFPs on your desk and you never look at the marketing plan again because that happens week after week after week. So step number 6 is the critical piece to make sure that you can actually accomplish all of the beautiful things that you set off to accomplish. Make sure that somebody is in charge. Make sure that they have a deadline. We know that this is a very deadline-driven profession, so deadlines are pretty critical in keeping people on check, even though I'm sure we've all had our share of fake deadlines because they're marketing. And to assign tasks out. Make sure that if you have somebody who is a subject matter expert and you want them to help you with a case study, don't tell them the week before you have your deadline to get the case study produced. Let them know, like, hey, in June, we want to be launching a case study on project XYZ or topic XYZ, so that then the 2 of you can work together and agree on what's our timeline going to be, what are the little baby steps that we need to take in order to meet the deadline, and when do we want to accomplish those little baby steps, and hold everybody accountable. So this is where you have your weekly or bi-weekly or monthly or whatever you have, your marketing meetings, your business development meetings. Everybody shows up and everyone needs to understand that, hey, we're accountable to the group so that we can get things done. And then, so choosing effective marketing tactics, just to give you a little idea, because it's like, these things can be like, oh, it sounds great. on paper, and then you go to actually put together a marketing tactic and you're like, okay, I kind of get it, but I don't really know what we should be doing. So here's some little cheat sheets for you. So your tactic is gonna depend on what you're trying to accomplish. Doing a brand campaign is a lot different than trying to get a municipal client, for instance. So what are the different things and how can you get in front of people? So think about a brand awareness campaign. There's things that you can do for free, pretty much, or there's things that you can pay to do. And what's going to be the balance in your marketing budget, which is, of course, going to stem through from your financial plan that you put together. So we can do some easy things like issuing press releases and doing social media. And when somebody comes back and they're like, oh, social media is a waste of time, doing press releases is a waste of time. Someone is likely not gonna pick up the phone and be like, hey, I saw your Instagram post, we wanna hire you. But they're gonna become more familiar with your firm name. They're gonna get a little more idea of what you're about. Maybe what your culture is about, what your design aesthetic is about, what type of projects that you work on, so that maybe in 5 months, they're like, oh, we need to design a new ground up K-12 school. Oh, I've been following this firm on Instagram and they do really cool work, let's call them. So it's really about the brand in some of these tactics versus lead generation campaigns. And then more money side, mission aligned sponsorships, thinking about what organizations you can support. And it's always great, like if you're at a networking event and say you're at like a NAOP event and you've talked to 10 people that work at development firms, like try to get a sense of, hey, what are you doing in your free time? Are there any organizations that are really close to your heart that you like to volunteer at? And you may start to see some trends and figure out like, oh, wow, we do affordable housing and 5 out of the 10 people that I spoke to all volunteer over at Pine Street Inn. So start volunteering over at Pine Street Inn and do some sponsorships and get in front of that crowd in also a very nice social justice way. Let's say your goal is market expansion. Your tactics are going to be a little different for a market expansion. You're going to be thinking a little more like, okay, here's my portfolio. And I want to jump from doing tenant fit out work to designing a whole entire ground up office building. Like how can you kind of fit that tenant fit out work into something that is a much broader scale? Do you need to start networking with other architecture firms that they don't really have the interior side of it, but you do? They can bring you along on the architecture side because they don't have enough manpower to be able to accomplish a project like that. Where are kind of the joint partnerships that you can start to build? Or maybe market expansion for you is you want to jump to a new geography. Say you're like the expert in high performance high schools in Massachusetts. You're the go-to firm. Well, if you're the go-to firm in Massachusetts, you could probably be a go-to firm in another state. So what's it like getting in that state? Do you need to partner with a firm in the other state? Or there's like this weird magic that happens that if you go out of your state and do a project in another state, all of a sudden you're much smarter than you are in your original state for some reason. So how can you leverage, like, I'm the outside expert in order to get those projects? Ooh, a late entry. And then recruiting top talent is like a whole different marketing strategy. And this is like going back to the content that I was talking about that like gets the architects really excited. Share that content as well, because that's what's going to get future hires excited. Think of ways that you can kind of entice somebody to want to work at your firm, because all of a sudden you've been awarded like one of the coolest projects in the city. So of course, somebody else would want to come on and start working on that. Social media, for a lot of firms that we've worked with, candidates now, particularly younger candidates, I mean, younger than me, are coming into the interviews and like reciting everything that they've seen on social media from the firm. And they're in the door because they've made a decision like, your social media feed is really cool and it looks like you do fun stuff and the projects are really great. So that's why I'm interviewing here. So that becomes a pretty critical tool in order to get talent in the door. And job advertisements. Oh my God, there's so many boring job advertisements out there. Which is like a whole thing on itself, but try to take a different look at your job advertisements and make it say something like, going back to that, we're a family-focused collaborative firm. Like, what is that? It's like, what do you mean you're family-focused? Like, my family's totally dysfunctional. Do I want to go work someplace that's family-focused? Maybe not. That's an example. I'm not saying my family is. And then collaborative. Like, what does collaborative mean? Does it mean that every day I'm in a project pod and we're sketching out ideas together and really interacting? Or is collaborative at your firm, we meet once a month and do a design shred? Because those are two very different definitions of collaborative. And yet, those are both examples of collaborative firms. So think about how can you be a little more specific? And then the bullet points, gotta love the bullet points. You as an individual need to do, so getting shut up.
This is fun. This is fun. Think it's on the line.
An abbreviation, 3 slides ago.
Yes.
SEO.
Search engine optimization. So the wonderful world of Google and how they deem whether or not you should come up in their search results is like a whole entire discipline. One of the things that we've been having good luck with is the Google reviews. Now Google has worked into their algorithm that if you have recent Google reviews, and they're good, of course, you'll start to notice that you'll climb in the search engine rankings. So ask your clients to give you a review. It feels like icky at first, but if you can get over kind of the icky feeling, then people generally are really happy to review you because your clients love you. They want to help you, assuming that you've done a great job on that project, which I'm sure you have. So I just want to make one final note about the bullet points. And so statistics have shown that particularly women and minorities with those bullet lists, if it's in the bullet list and they don't match that bulleted thing, they're not going to apply to your job. So if it is not absolutely critical that they have whatever, that they're a pro in SketchUp, Rhino, InDesign, Revit, and ArchiCAD all at once, then don't put it in the bullet points because all you'll do is get less applicants.
I've also seen like some job listings that have like, if you don't have all of these like pieces or you like, but you feel like drawn to the role, like just illustrate in your cover letter why you'd be a great candidate. for the job.
Mhm.
To sort of encourage, like, if you don't, if, you know, no one's gonna hit every single bullet point.
Right.
Um,
Yeah, and there's sort of a, like, if you think of a job advertisement, woo-hoo, along with a job description, the advertisement is meant to get somebody to apply to a job. It's like the base level type of person that could be a good fit for the job. When you do the screening call, then share the job description with them that goes into more detail of, this is what you're going to be working on every day. This is the growth that you could have. These are the nice to haves. Okay. And we're still talking about recruiting, so we're on schedule. So, 6 steps to build your marketing plan. We filled in the marketing box. Mind-blowing financial stuff that you'll want to have the worksheet so that you can go back and remember all of the formulas. Unless there's anyone in the finance department in the room, you probably know the formulas off the top of your head. Operations, you know, kind of organizational design and how to think about things. And the purpose, you know, why your firm exists. So I want to leave you with an exercise that I really like to do during planning stages. And I call it the firm drivers exercise. These are kind of 4 different boxes, but 3 of them are the same. So if you think about your firm, that you have an operations component, you have a project delivery component, you have a culture component, and you have a marketing and BD component. Those are kind of the buckets that make up your whole entire firm. So you want to, as you're brainstorming, you want to be thinking about like what's working here and what's not working, or what could be working so much better. So explain to people what each of the buckets are. Like project delivery is where architects live every day. It's kind of working on the work, getting the work out the door. The operations is what's kind of the foundation that's serving your firm so that you can do the work. What are the HR policies? What are the benefits that you're offering to employees? What kind of technology are you using? Do you have like this old legacy stuff you need to get rid of? Is there some new cool tool that you want to be testing out? Marketing and business development, how are you attracting people? How are you getting that sale? And that culture, like what's the underpinning of what is it like to work in this firm? So with all of these buckets, then give everybody stacks of Post-it notes and markers and give them some individual time, like 15-20 minutes. It doesn't have to be a ton of time, and ask them to write down 1 idea per Post-it note. And it should be a mix of things that are like near and dear to them that they don't want to see change, and things that are kind of causing a little bit of a headache, and then things that are just like, you need to get rid of this. Once everyone is done filling out their Post-it notes, they all get posted on a wall into the categories of the 4 buckets, and then have people talk through, this is what I was thinking when I wrote this Post-it. And once you collect all of that information, you'll start to see all of these threads kind of come through everybody's comments. And then that gives you an idea of, you know what, I think this year we really need to focus on this, and this. And then there's the basis of your business plan. And then you have to make sure that the finance is supported and you can pull the operations together to support it, and marketing and business development to support it. And the beauty of making everybody write on the Post-it notes is everybody has to talk. It helps for the people that are a little more introverted and a little less comfortable putting their idea out in front of a group to actually get more involved and share, and you'll find gems from everyone. Okay. Here's the QR code that I mentioned before. If you scan this, it will take you to a landing page, throw in your email address and download the planning sheet. And then if you do that, I'll go through those email addresses and I'll send out the deck as well. Or if you just want the deck, pick up a business card and send us an email and ask for it. And we have 5 minutes left for questions.
It can be longer because we do have wine and beer and chicken crackers, companies that for people after
Yeah.
that it can go into. Yeah.
Any questions online? If anyone's left online?
Question about recruiting,
Mhm.
and it goes to because that was the last thing I was thinking about, and it goes to the question of how you prove out the value of some of these things which have difficult to assess benefits like social media. Do you know of firms that do like an intake sort of post-hiring survey to find out why somebody, reached out to a firm, why they ultimately decided to join the firm?
I don't personally work with anyone who has a formal survey that they do, but they do ask in the interview stage, like, how did you come to find out about us?
Ultimately, what I want to hear is somebody say, I came to your firm because I really liked your social media feed. I want to take that information, put it into a chart and say, see, this is why we do LinkedIn. This, or like, I came to you because I really love your rebrand. I go, see, the value of the rebrand is proven, they joined.
Yeah. I had a principal come to me with one of the firms that I work with, and he said, I have had 3 developers this week comment on how much they love our LinkedIn feed. So I was like, wow, can you put that on a poster for me? But it's like that beautiful adage that I know 80% of my marketing works, I just don't know which 80%. Any other questions?
I read something in your archetypes
Mhm.
the importance of quiet architecture firms need better mission, vision, and values statements. How important do you think they are as sort of foundation for a business plan or an outgrowth of a business plan? A specific mission, vision, and value statement that has a set of principles that everybody aligns with, so that you communicate with clients too, so that they know that you want to meet their needs in like the unique way that you say.
I think they're critical. That's my opinion at least. Because it really does, like you said, it's the foundation of the firm. If you know what the mission statement is, you know why you're walking in the door every day to go to work or logging onto your computer from home. If you know the vision, you understand why certain decisions are being made, or why sometimes you're hearing no about a project that you think would be a really great fit. And that values are just a really nice way to make those decisions of this client aligns with our values, we want to work with them. This client, we have a value, we don't work with jerks, and this client's kind of a jerk. So do you want to work with them, or should that be kind of a sign like this isn't going to work out? So that's why I think that they're very important.
Right.
I just wanted to agree with you and add an technical anecdote. So I've worked at several firms that develop strategic planning processes, and firms that struggle with answering those fundamental foundational questions, often it's like systemic of other issues that like end up making it really hard to make business plans into like being goals for long term. So they don't know who they are
Yeah.
deep down. And so I've like seen it, what they know you are, who you are as a firm.
Mhm.
Your price roadmap.
Yeah.
Yeah, if your firm doesn't have a mission statement and you have the opportunity to guide them through getting to a mission statement, it's a fascinating process because you'll discover like these people have been working together for 15 years and they don't agree on what they're actually doing. It's like, it's staggering and it happens too often. Any other questions? Go for it, Kate.
Call me off. I think it's for you too, Rhea. I'm working with some principals who are developing business plans for different practice, like sectors. And one of the challenges that we're finding is identifying specific client targets. Like, we can identify client groups that we work with, but identifying specific targets has been a challenge. I don't know if you have any, suggestions, or like how specific should these targets be when you're setting out?
And so I feel like and Rena might have a different or complementary answer. I feel like it's market specific, like for example, higher education work. A lot of times you can find the campus master plans online, so you can get pretty specific to, we want to work with Bowdoin College because we know that they're spending 50 million on infrastructure in the next 10 years. So with a client like that, you can get hyper specific. But if you're working, if say you do a lot of development work and the developers are a little more restricted in what they can say about what they're working on, then it's harder to get down to a project level. But you could say, like, I see that Colliers is doing really interesting work in luxury housing. So they as a group could be a target. And then if you can try to get to know them, you'll be able to dig down a little more into, oh, it's really like this 5-person development group within Colliers that is aligned with what we want to be doing.
I'm not sure what I can add to that. I think you said it all. I mean, except that when you create a branch office or, really need a business plan for that office as a, separate unit almost, so how much investment is it going to take to establish this office, and what kind of revenue do you expect to get back? Is it worth it? Is it going to somehow add to the financial strength of the company, or maybe not? Or maybe, you can decide it's worth it if it takes 2 years because, there's so much opportunity there. So the investment becomes critical.
I have a question about physical offices when you want to expand your markets. I don't know whether because it's cheaper to recruit somebody, but you have to trust that person fully. And if the person is not based in your headquarters, but there are so many other advantages. I'm going to be completely transparent. A person here is very, very expensive to recruit. The salaries are very high. So you might go to, I don't know, forgive me, Alabama. You go to Alabama. Then you might get a very highly qualified architect with a half salary. So my question to you is, if you are expanding your market, should you still think about the physical office, or should you recruit people remotely? That's what I don't know if, I don't know which one is the best.
I think that if you're actually starting a branch office, it's really important to have somebody you trust head that up. So you might have to send an employee there, and then hire somebody else there, who maybe eventually can take over if that person wants to come back from Alabama. Or, if, sometimes firm principals have relationships with other firms, or it's more about acquiring a firm that's in this other location. You know, if your firm has the wherewithal to do that, but still, you gotta, you probably need to send a leader that you trust to establish it at least for a while.
Brina is heading to Alabama. Who wants to have-
That's what- We have a wonderful firm there that we work with, really love.
Nothing against Alabama. No, I didn't know. Normally Tebow.
What else? Or is everyone ready for wine and beer? And cheese and crackers?
Well, I have another last question, very operational. How long should you allocate to prepare all these,
Ooh, good question.
documents?
Are we too late?
Yeah. No, I normally start now. For the BD, for the end of December. Yeah, so is it now, but then obviously the other pieces
Yeah.
are more like, can you still do the BD and the marketing without the other pieces which are more complex and will require a culture change?
You need to at least get clear on your goals first, so that you know that marketing and business development are supporting your goals.
Yeah.
So think of it from the aspect of, okay, when can I get everybody in a room so that we can put together some goals? And then once those goals are established, you can start to break it off into more bite-sized pieces to get at the operations, get at the financial portion of it, get at the marketing and business development portion of it. But September is a great month to start.
Yeah.
Because it would be, I mean, realistically, you can pull together a plan in 3 to 4 days. But who is able to lock the necessary people in a room together for 3 to 4 days so that you can actually get the plan together? So that's where it just gets extended into eternity sometimes, trying to get schedules to align.